Let me bring you up to speed with the PC that you're seeing on screen right now. This little machine was actually imported from the US a few years ago, and it's exactly the same model that I had when I was a teenager. I always said to myself that if I could ever find one, I'd have to pick it up. Now, it's not rare, it's not particularly powerful, it certainly isn't collectible, but it was our family's first PC and I've got a lot of fond memories tied up in it. Over time, I've come to realise, well, it's not exactly a great computer, but I still love it for all its quirks and flaws. So what does this have to do with the title of the video? Well, I thought that now I'm a little older, a little wiser, and let's be honest, maybe carrying a few extra pounds, I'd revisit something that nearly scared me away from Linux for good when I was 16. Back then, I decided to try installing my very first Linux distribution, SuSE Linux 5.2. It came free on a cover CD of the October 1998 issue of PC Plus magazine. And in my teenage optimism, I thought, well, how hard can it be? After all, it even came with a 447-page electronic manual. Surely that meant I'd be fine, right? Well, not exactly, and I'll tell you the whole story right after a quick message from today's sponsor, PCBWay. Any day you get a package from PCBWay is a good day. In my last video, I said I'd have to manufacture a way to hold an SD to IDE adapter. But PCBWay had my back. I simply uploaded this 3D model of a bracket and PCBWay did the rest. And look at these. They don't look 3D printed at all. The quality's outstanding and I couldn't be happier. Not only do they offer 3D printing services, but many others, including PCB prototyping, fabrication, CNC machining, and even sheet metal fabrication. From September 1st, enjoy increasing discounts on TPU FDM prints. The heavier you print, the bigger the saving. And if you want to add a vibrant touch to your PCB projects, choose Purple Solder Mask at no extra cost, free also until the end of September. And finally, join PCBWay's 8th Design Contest, which runs from September the 1st, 2025 to January the 31st, 2026. Full details, themes and how to enter, check the link below. And thanks as always to PCBWay for your continued support of this channel. I'd obviously heard of Linux before. After all, it had been around for 7 years by the time I got my hands on this cover CD, but back then in the UK, broadband hadn't arrived yet. It was still a couple of years away, and the idea of downloading an entire CD's worth of data was pure fantasy. To give you some perspective, I once downloaded a little 4x4 racing game on my iMac. It was only 40 megabytes, but still took over 2 hours. Now imagine trying to grab 650 megabytes over dial-up. That's why cover CDs were a lifeline of the time, and I built up quite a collection. There were probably plenty of other Linux distributions floating around back then, but this one, SuSE 5.2, was my very first, and left a lasting impression. Machines of this era generally didn't come with the ability to boot from CD, so we'll need to make a boot disk. Letting the CD auto-run doesn't initially fill you with much confidence, as you're greeted with a warning that SuSE or future publishing can't be held responsible for any problems it may cause your machine. To proceed, you have to type in "I agree" in all caps and then press the proceed button. Now most of the issues I'm going to come across are probably explained in the PDF, but I'm not going to read that, am I? No, instead we'll quit this application and go and explore the CD and try and find out about this boot disk stuff. In the root of the CD is what looks like a setup batch file, so we'll run that and see what happens. Now before all you keyboard warriors take to the comments before I've even started, yes, I know. It first warned me that this was for advanced users, and yes, mercifully Linux is much easier to install these days. But this is how it was all those years back, and you'll be able to see later why I almost never went back to try it again. We're not even 20 seconds in, and there's stuff here that I don't understand. I don't need an explanation, I'm just going to wing it. I mean, all we're doing at this point is making a boot disk, so if it doesn't work, what's the worst that can happen? 57 seconds later, and we have a freshly written boot floppy. All that's left now is to reboot the machine, and we can start our Linux journey. Well, that's the idea anyway. After the machine posts, we're in completely uncharted territory, and this is immediately obvious by the word ldlinux.sys, and from what I gather is a bootloader for Linux. And sure enough, here we are. The phrase of "have a lot of fun" I find to be quite ironic, considering how poorly this attempt is going to turn out. It takes a few moments to boot completely from the floppy disk, which is to be expected. They never were fast, and it looks like the setup is going to be text mode. That's different. And then, oh my god, what is this? Now, I'd never seen a machine boot in verbose mode before, so this was quite unnerving to see. We then need to choose our language and if we want colour or white text on a black background for the installation program. We can then start the installation, which asks where the source media is, which of course is the CD-ROM. At the time, I didn't know what NFS was, and my machine wasn't networked, so that option was out of the window. And hard drive. Yeah, hard drives are expensive, so I only had one. This is where I was thrown in at the deep end. Already, there were new words that I had to get used to, like YaST, which stands for Yet Another Setup Tool, and is a way to configure your system. Why wasn't it just called Setup or something? Well, I hadn't done an install before, so I didn't have a floppy disk to insert. And I now know the first thing I needed to do was create a partition, format it, and specify a mount point, whatever one of those was. Where on earth would I go to find out such a thing? It was at this point I thought I might be in a little over my head. However, in for a penny, in for a pound. I honestly didn't understand what was going on here. I do now. But I'm going to be lazy and let the system use whatever defaults it suggests. I can always go back and change it if necessary. Formatting the drive took a scary couple of minutes. Had I done it right? Had I chosen the right options? Is it working? Had it crashed? What is it doing? On a Mac, you never needed to worry about drive letters, but on Windows you did. I knew that much. So here, where it says /dev/HDA, I guess HD meant hard drive and A for the first one. I was trying to translate what I understood into what I was seeing. But what did the number 1 mean? Could you have multiple HDAs? Well, yes, as I've learned. This is to do with the partitions on the drive. It's quite logical looking back at it now. And for those of you who are much more experienced with Linux than I'm sorry, I can hear your eyes rolling all the way from over here. As I mentioned before, I'm going to accept all of the defaults and just let the installer do its thing. One of the nice things I found was it tells you the number of packages, their size, how many are remaining, and at the bottom of the screen what current package is being installed, and a super short description. However, quite how you launch these packages I wasn't sure yet. I watched with interest as each package got installed, but not knowing how much space all this would consume. Then, just under 10 minutes later, the installation of the base system was complete. It then writes a few other files to the system, and then asks if I want to install Lilo. Lilo? I thought a Lilo was what we called something inflatable that you could lie on and float around in a pool. Well, if it stands for Linux Loader, should I be pronouncing it as Lilo, like Lilo and Stitch? Oh yeah, that hadn't been released yet. I'll stick with Lilo, and definitely not Lilu, you know.
Lilu Dallas Multipass.
I thought the installation of the base system went entirely too easily, and it lulled me into a false sense of security. It was at this point things took a turn for the worse. One of the very first things you have to do is set a root password. It's good that the on-screen instructions tell you what's going on, as I had no idea what a root account was. Also, this is a single user machine, so I didn't see the need to create another account, so I just went with root. It then tells me that I need to run something called xf86config. Now, the little I knew about Linux, I did know it had a windowing system, and that windowing system was called X. So xf86config was probably something to do with that. But for a 16-year-old me, this was super complicated. Sure, things like specifying your mouse were easy, but then it started asking things about your vertical and horizontal refresh rates of your monitor, and what graphics accelerators to use. It was all just a little bit too much, but I persevered, or at least I attempted to. Back then, we didn't have Google, and as this was my only system, and it wasn't exactly in a usable state, well, for me at least, I couldn't just dial up to the internet, or even read that 447-page PDF. For hours and hours I went round in circles trying to get the config right. I'd run x86 config over and over, specifying different options, but to no avail. But here is where modern me has the edge. Yes, I have many other machines to use, but I also have a secret weapon. And that secret weapon is called Wolf. Right, Wolf?
Sorry? Oh, yes, yeah, absolutely.
It's telling me that the X server doesn't seem to be a binary file. Fix for me, please.
It sounds like you don't have x386 installed. If you just fire up YaST, you should be able to install it that way.
Okay, it's given me 2 files. I've removed that one and tried to start X, but it's coming up with another message saying that there's no link to a binary of the X server. How do I fix that?
Yeah, it doesn't know which version of X you have installed, so you just need to create a symlink. There, try that.
It's now complaining about a connection refused. This is infuriating.
Yeah, I gotta be honest, this is about the time I would usually give up trying to get X to work, because who needs a GUI anyway, really, you know?
After futzing around for a few hours, I finally managed to get X working, and boy was it a letdown. As I'd chosen the defaults on the installer, the default window manager was FVWM, and boy is it ugly. Not only that, but it displays 800 by 600 at 640 by 480, so windows go off the screen until you move the mouse over. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out how to set the resolution correctly. And then there was the colour depth. By the looks of it, it's running at 16 colours, and again I couldn't get it to display any higher. I found through randomly clicking through menus that there is also an FVWM 95 window manager, which tries to have a very similar look to Windows 95, which I was more familiar with. However, the screen resolution issue persisted and it was not a fun experience, but at least I had a GUI so I could poke around. The next thing I wanted to get up and running was audio, but unlike XF86 config, I couldn't see anything obvious that would allow me to run something to configure the sound card. Now the sound card in this machine is an ESS1688 plug-and-play audio drive, which I had lots of issues with in Windows and DirectX, so it doesn't bode well running it on an unsupported platform considering how poor the experience was running it on a supported one. Then finally we have the same issue with the modem. I don't know a way of configuring it, and quite honestly this has been far too much fuss and effort, with very little reward. I'm going to reformat the drive and use the system restore media to get the computer back to what it was before I decided upon this most ridiculous misstep. A quick note about window managers that I've since uncovered. Hidden away in the installation package options is KDE 1.0. Although only in beta, I got it installed without too much drama, but here's the snag. I've no idea how to make it the default when starting X, and without Wolf on speed dial, my Linux knowledge is still wobbly at best. I'm a bit stuck. Oh, and that infuriating screen resolution and colour depth problem? Yep, it's still hanging around like an uninvited guest. So what have we learned in the 30 years since my teenage attempt? Installing this particular flavour of Linux remains an exercise in patience or madness. To those who succeed, I happily doff my cap. Back in the day I was 16, overconfident, and in too much of a hurry to read the manual properly. Had I slowed down, I probably would have had a better time of it. But at 16, I was impetuous and Linux was merciless. Fast forward to today, and I know a lot more, yet it's still a bit of a rollercoaster ride. X starts up about 3 times out of every 5, so I guess that counts as progress, right? One of the big reasons I didn't stick with Linux back then was the software gap. Our family PC came bundled with all sorts of shiny Microsoft goodies, none of which worked on Linux. The handful of games I had, well, it was the same story. I was left with the bundled tools, and let's be honest, it's pretty hard to get excited about Emacs, and if you are excited about Emacs, well, you might want to go and have a word with your GP. Between the software drought and the endless fiddling with my hardware, my 1998 Linux adventure left a bit of a sour taste. And that, my dear friends, is why Linux and I have never quite seen eye to eye. Well, if you made it this far, thanks ever so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.